Great lead into this talk, which follows beautifully on from that. So I'm talking about building the Pure Land, building the Buddha land. My name's Satyajyoti, and as Bodhinaga said, we're in a series which is on living Buddhism. So it's how do we practice Buddhism today in our culture, with our conditioning, with our society and our kind of cultural norms. Because the Buddha taught the Dharma over 2,500 years ago, and we live in very different conditions. And actually, we're still human beings, so the Dharma is still the same, and it still works. But some of the ways that we practice it, we'll need to change in order to meet our different psyches, our different ways of being. And Bodhinaga talked last week about the Bodhisattva ideal, which is that really beautiful, that sublime ideal, which is about aiming for enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So not just doing it for yourself, but doing it for all beings. The Bodhisattva, in this sense, is someone who's on the path to enlightenment. And within them, something has arisen that's very deep and very profound understanding that all beings are interconnected. So actually, the Bodhisattva knows that there's no way that their enlightenment could be separate from that of all beings. The two things they're just not separate. And so Bodhinaga talked about how we might live this Bodhisattva ideal today in our own lives, how this sublime, this transcendental myth can be expressed and lived in our own lives. And one thing that I was very taken with is he talked about how we might practice in every situation. Instead of going in thinking, oh, what can I get from this? What can I get from that? Well, in fact, I just did it. But anyway, what can I get from the table there with all that lovely food? We might think, what can I give? What can I give? And we can bring that to every situation. And it's a very natural inclination to think, what can I get from this? But turning it around, looking at what I can give to a situation rather than what I can get, is life transforming. That's really my experience of it, actually. A lot of suffering sort of disappears if you're just thinking about what you can give rather than what you can get. And I think it's a very practical way that we can practice as trainee bodhisattvas, perhaps in everyday life. And today we're looking at how actually we can do that together as a Sangha, how we can together try and look at how we can give to create a situation in which we can all grow and develop. And we're also looking about how a bodhisattva might go about creating a community of practitioners as part of their own vow of enlightenment for all beings. And by growing, I mean by developing. It's like for us to become happier, freer, kinder, wiser, more open to reality, less trapped by our habits, less trapped by our thoughts. So this is a very traditional Buddhist idea, the Pure Land or the Buddha field. I'm going to just use those words interchangeably. I think they probably do have slightly different meanings if you're going to be technical about it, but I'm just going to use them interchangeably. And what does it mean for us today to try to create or be part of a Pure Land or a Buddha field? So the idea of a Pure Land developed right from the time of the Buddha. And a Pure Land is a sphere of being or activity that is developed around a Buddha. And in that area, in that sphere, everything is conducive to our spiritual growth. And there are a lot of texts which describe in great detail, really great detail, the beauty of the Pure Land. So the Pure Land is filled with trees that are made of precious jewels. I imagine them kind of sparkling in the sun, these really beautiful trees. There are pools of delightful water to bathe in. These again they're lined with jewels and precious substances. The beings in the Pure Land don't need to worry about getting shelter and enough to eat like we do. All of that is just readily available, or they just don't need it. All they need to do is listen to the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, and that's everywhere. So it's in the song of the birds, it's in the rustling of the leaves on the trees, it's in the wind. In a Pure Land, it's really easy to gain enlightenment. And each Pure Land is developed by a Buddha, a sphere of influence of a Buddha who creates this Buddha field around them. There's a classic Buddhist text, the Vimalakirti Nadesha, and in that text, the Buddha is asked, how does a Buddha create a Pure Land? And the answer is that a Buddha field, a Pure Land, is created from people. So it's not really a place. I think all those things about the place, it's a bit like giving us a sense of what it would be like to live in that world. Actually, a pure land is a pure land to the extent that the people in it are growing and developing. So it's the ideal environment for leading of the spiritual life. And the foundation of the Pure Land is this mutual helpfulness in leading the spiritual life together. So it's made up of people, their practice, their communication, their joint aspirations to support each other in creating conditions. Those conditions that help us grow. So for Pure Land is a place where we can easily practice the Dharma, where we're in conditions that support us. What does that mean for us? What conditions support us to grow? Well, at the time of the Buddha, it was part of society at that time that they really kind of honoured spiritual seekers. So it's possible for men, and to an extent women, to leave home and to wander about, and they would be supported by local people, given food. I think if local people liked the person who was kind of teaching or seeking, they'd really support them. So you could actually leave home and you could wander, you live a very simple life, not worry about having to earn money or anything like that. And then over the years, in those countries where Buddhism's taken root, quite often they've developed a kind of monastic and lay split. So some people live full-time lives as monks or nuns, and lay people support them financially. And what the lay people are doing is they're building up merit by supporting people, the monastics, but quite often they're not actually expecting to make great progress themselves in this life. They're kind of hoping that by supporting the monastics, it'll help them out next time. So what about for us today? Well, I guess if we were to wander off into the Peak District and go from house to house begging for food and then sleeping out, it might not work out that well, actually. And I guess there are spiritual communities, Buddhist, Christian, others, in which we might become monastics. But usually it's not a life that particularly appeals or is practical for most people. So how do we create the conditions, the Pure Land for us to practice in 2023 in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, Derbyshire, wherever we live? How do we create those conditions? So I guess we need to start by asking, well, what conditions do we need to help us, conditions that will help us to grow kinder and to liberate us? What helps us to live ethically? What helps us to have a strong meditation practice? What helps us to understand reality, see through those bonds that are holding us back? We need to work out for ourselves what works for us, actually. I think my experience of my life, spiritual life, has been understanding my own conditioning and what I need to thrive. It's a bit like I need something that's challenging, but not overwhelming. So there's something about how you find that kind of edge in situations that support you, challenge you slightly, but don't overwhelm you so much. So, I don't know, if you're new and you think, right, I'll go on a meditation retreat for 3 weeks in complete silence, sitting 5 times a day, you might get overwhelmed by it. And you might just think, I can't do this. So there's something about finding those conditions that are right for us. And of course, we know that from the introductory course, that we can look for the gap between our feelings and our responses, and that instead of being reactive, we can be creative. And that in doing that, we can set up whole new ways of being in the world, as it were, creating new selves. But we also know, if we've been trying to do that, how challenging it can be to do that with deep habits. So if in our lives, I think we've responded many times to situations, maybe with craving, so something we don't like, something we think, oh God, I really crave some distraction on my phone or something to fill this gap, this void in me. Or maybe we've responded many times with irritation to a situation we find difficult. Actually, it's very hard to be in the gap with those situations. And first of all, it's even hard to notice at the time that is happening. And secondly, it's really hard to remember to do something different when you're feeling pretty rubbish and you just want to do the old way, of dealing with that dukkha, that suffering. So actually, if we really want to change, if we want to become more aware and kinder, we just need all the help we can get. Because we're like plants in our spiritual lives. You'll hear this metaphor again and again. Is if we want to grow, we want to give ourselves the right conditions, the right water, light, soil, etc. As anyone who's tried to grow anything will know, plants are different, they need different conditions. And conditions really have a huge effect on us. How we behave and what our inner experiences are really a result of our conditioning. And I think I found that quite hard to really get my head around that, actually, because I sort of feel like somehow, I don't know, I'm created by me or something, or I'm in charge of myself or something. But actually, if you just do like a few brain experiments, or I think they're called mind experiments, thought experiments. For instance, imagine that you've got the same genetic makeup as you have, but you're born into a completely different time historically. So maybe you're born into poverty in Victorian times in Sheffield. Okay, so you're born to a mother who doesn't have enough to eat, into a world that only offers you from a very young age, long hours, working in factories, the particular ideas in that society about how men should be and how women should be, all sorts of things there. Well, I know if I'd been born into those conditions, I'd be a very different person than I am now. You know, might have had the same genetic makeup, but I'd be really different. And of course, we see that when we travel to different cultures and we realize that people do things differently and that they behave and respond in different ways. So our conditions really, really affect us. And some of our conditions, of course, are out of our control. We just can't control them. And what we need to do with those is do what we can to respond creatively to our conditions. But actually, some of our conditions are within our control. And I think a great thing about being alive in 2023 is that actually quite a lot of us do have a fair amount of control over our conditions. So I just made a list for myself of some of the conditions that I think we need. But I think, you know, something maybe to talk about in the group is what conditions do you need? And those will change as well. So the first condition for me actually is the people around me. I'm really affected by the people around me, who I spend time with, and what these people think are important. And I have kind of like some really quite a bit frivolous examples of this when it became very clear to me a few years ago. So one was that because I was going abroad, I was going trekking, I thought I needed to do like a first aid course, and I did it part of a mountain leadership first aid course with all these people who are doing this award that's called the Mountain Leadership. And I just went for a weekend. It was a great course, really enjoyed it. But by the end, I was like, right, I need to do my mountain leadership. I really need to do that. It'd be great. Then I could take everyone from the Buddhist Centre on these big expeditions. It'd be fantastic. But what it was, that just a weekend around other people doing a particular thing had affected me so much that I thought I wanted to do it. It's like a really silly example, but I could just see it so clearly in that example. So the people around us and what they're into, and what they think life is about, they really affect us. Another thing that really affects me and my practice is if my life gets too busy. So a simpler life, which is less busy, where my mind is less busy, that's really conducive to me meditating, reflecting, being happier. Linked to that is time to rest, to relax, and time to meditate properly, so that I'm not just thinking, what am I doing today? What am I doing? So I've actually got time to meditate, let my thoughts calm down, and so I can do some more positive kind of meditation. Something I think is important to humans is the opportunity to give and to serve something bigger. I think time in beauty and nature is really important to us all. Friendship and love, of course, feeling loved, having good friendships, and having meaning in our lives, having the Dharma, for instance, whatever it is that gives us meaning. Those are all really important conditions for us as human beings, I think, to thrive and to practice. So I guess the question we ask ourselves is, how can we, in our lives today, create conditions in which we can spend time with people who share the same ideals as us? How can we live simply so we don't have full minds all the time? How can we make time to meditate, to be in nature, to enjoy beauty, to spend our time with friends? And this question has been a concern for Buddhists in the UK since the late 1960s, when people first really started practicing as Buddhists. Because actually probably many of us have tried going it alone. So just reading Buddhist books, trying to meditate on our own, trying to practice a simpler, more ethical life in the middle of this busy, complex consumer culture we live in. Maybe we watch talks online, maybe we've tried to do, some online meditations. But I found that really difficult to keep going on my own. And I presume, because we're here, most of us have also found that difficult to do as well. So over the years, a number of ways that we can support each other to practice together have developed within Triratna. And traditionally, one way of doing this was called the 3 C's, which because they were centre, community, and cooperatives. So it's ways of living together, working together, and creating centres like this one, where people can find out about the Dharma and practice together. So cooperatives came to be called team-based right livelihoods. Right livelihoods, because they're from that, one of the limbs of the Noble Eightfold Path, that right livelihood, that if we can find a way to support ourselves that is ethical, that's really good for our practice. And team-based, because working in it as a team, held in the framework of the Dharma, can be such a great way to grow. Because I think it's a really great way to be aware of the tension between self and other, this tension that we have. So for instance, how can we be generous to others we work with, but not be a doormat? Because it's easy to do either or, isn't it? It's easy to go, oh, well, you have all the holidays, I'll work, that's fine. Or to go, no, I'll take loads of holidays and you have to work. But to do something in the middle where you're trying to work out where everybody's conditions are being met, actually, that can take quite a lot of work and you can grow quite hard through those tensions. Also tensions about, how to be with people you just don't naturally get on with, and how to practice, keep being ethical while you're under the pressure of getting something done, achieving something. And actually, also a lot of fun. So working with your friends, with your Buddhist friends, doing something worthwhile, well, it's a great way to live. And we spend so much much of our lives working, that if we can do that time with Buddhists, it's great. So there's been lots of right livelihoods that have kind of come and gone. There was a really successful kind of gift shop and ethical kind of gifts. What was it? A chain. It was a chain of shops. It was like a big thing. There's a chain of shops. The shops are called Evolution. And then there's a wholesaler called Windhorse at the centre based in Cambridge. And there were hundreds of people who were employed in that, particularly when it was most successful. I mean, sadly, it had to close. It just stopped making money. I guess times changed. So there was the internet and other similar shops were opening, like gift shops. So it had to close. But it was a really successful example of that. Made a lot of money as well. For a while, Dharma Cafe up in Crooks for quite a long while was a team-based right livelihood and has given us lots of money, which is very kind of them. And we're going to spend very well. I'm going to tell you about that in the future. At the moment in Sheffield, there's a team-based right livelihood called Still Learning, which is a project teaching Buddhism to school children and other students. And quite a lot of people here have probably either volunteered or worked for that project. And they still need people to get involved. So if you're interested in that project, there's room there. And another place where we might have room for people, we do have room, is that for ages we've been just on the edge of setting up a charity shop that would be a team-based right livelihood, employing a few people. And we just need 1 or 2 more people who can commit to it for a few years. So if you think that's something you might be interested in or just helping, just talk to me or Emma. Emma is leading on it. So that's the whole idea of working together in an ethical way. So of course we're also influenced by who we live with, the people we live with. So people who can and want to often decide to live together in communities. So there's the men's community in this building and the women's where I live, which is just down the road, and there's a mixed community as well. And communities can be challenging and they can be really great. If it suits you, it's a great way to live actually. A very supportive way to live, and it's an ideal way to kind of see through your conditioning and how you think things should be done and to learn lots of good ways of doing things. But of course, so those are the, so many of us can't do this. We have families, we have work, we might not want to live in a community or work in a team-based right livelihood. So then we need to look at our conditions very consciously and do what we can to make them as supportive as possible, to make them a pure land for us. So our work, our home life, how we spend our time. I thought that might be a thing to talk about in groups as well. It's about, can you make your life more like a pure land? Of course, going on retreat is a really good way to get a taste of a pure land. And that's because you go away for a few days or longer to a beautiful place with people, and you just practice the Dharma together. Some people have been on Sangha retreats or on other retreats. There is a retreat coming up at Adhisthana at the beginning of August. That's 4 days. And I'd really recommend that, because Adhisthana in itself is such a beautiful place. It is a Pure Land, and we will go and just soak all that in. So that's a great retreat to book on. And I guess if we can't work together or we can't live together, well, that means that the third C, the centre, is really important if we want to spend time with other people who are also practicing. Because we can work together to create a mini Pure Land within the greater impure society we live in here at Sheffield Buddhist Centre. So hopefully we can create the conditions together, create the Buddha Land that allows us to grow together. And there's a very traditional way of working together to create those conditions, which is called the Samgra Vastus, which can be translated as the elements of unification. So it's how to bring people together. And there's a story that comes with this. The Buddha went to see one of his disciples who was called Hartika, and he'd been there a few years before, and there'd just been Hartika, I think, practicing in Hartika's town at that time. But when the Buddha went back, Hartika had a Sangha of 500 people. And it was only a few years later, and the Buddha was like, wow, how did you do that? And Hartika said, well, I just did what you told me, which was to practice these 4 Samgra Vastus. So the first is dana, or generosity. And this is not, not a forced kind of giving. This is a generosity, because actually there's a giving and taking is a form of communication. It builds connection. So I think when I'm thinking what card might somebody like, or what present might they like, I'm doing what I can to step into their shoes and think what they'd really want. So it's a really good way of connecting with them. And then when somebody gives me something, well, it's just really lovely. I love it when somebody gives me something, that feeling of just really pleased. It really connects you to the person that's given you something. So it's there's just something very beautiful in a flow of giving. And as Bodhinaga said, next week at the Mitra ceremonies, well, hopefully there will be that flow, that lovely feeling of writing, just really short cards, little cards to give to everybody who's going to become a Mitra, if you want to, because it's really important that dana is done because you want to. Really, really important. And it's hard to, I suppose there's a balance, isn't there? Because sometimes I have to go beyond what I think I want to do just to be a little bit more generous, just to kind of learn how to be more generous. But if you're just giving because you think you should, or because you think other people will like you because you do or something, that's not true generosity. So there's a whole area to discuss in dana. And of course, dana, generosity, is so important in this Buddhist centre. So we really want to develop a community of people who are giving what they can because they want to. So we offer everything for free, as you know, so that things aren't done here on an exchange basis. The exchange would be, I guess, people give the centre money, and in return, the centre gives people courses and meditations and things like that. We really don't do that. We really work on that everything is free, and people give. And people give in lots of different ways. They give money, they give their time, they cook, they clean, they do the garden. It's just endless, the things that people do that make all this building and this big community work together. And I think it gives us a particular atmosphere. Not every Buddhist centre is able to work on a dana basis. We're lucky that we can. And I think it does give us a particular atmosphere here. So the second of these ways of bringing people together, unifying people, is called priyavadata, or loving speech, kind and loving speech. And again, I think the Mitra ceremonies next week are a wonderful example of that, because we hear wonderful things about people that actually, usually, I often only hear about people when they've died, which is such a shame, because they never get to hear it, In a way, just I suppose Gavin died. It's a bit like an example of all these lovely things I've been saying about Gavin these last few days, and I probably didn't take time to tell him, actually, which is really sad. So there's something about just by affectionate speech, kindly people, and just rejoicing in people. If you enjoy something about somebody, tell them, because you know what it's like when someone says something to you. You know, it's just lovely. I love that feeling when someone says, I don't know, whatever it is, they rejoice in something about me. It just creates a beautiful atmosphere. And the third thing is beneficial activity. So this is activity that helps people to grow, that inspires people, gives them a spark, the candle that lights other people, and then people can light other people's candles from that candle. So I hope it's everything we do at the centre here. It's, you know, the garden, the inside of the centre, all the different activities that go on here, the study groups, the retreats, and so on. And then the fourth is exemplification. So the idea is that we, as much as we can, we live in a way that is in accord with what we say. So as much as possible, all of us try and live in accord with how we talk about things. However, I'm certainly not enlightened. I'm certainly just practicing. And there are things I talk about that I can't live up to. So what Sangha, the founder of Pureland, says, if you're in that situation, just communicate where you are. Just embody the process itself of growing. That you're in process, you're not perfect, but you're growing. And I think for anybody who, I don't know, is helping out with a newcomer's course, anybody who's leading study or in a study group, that's such a beautiful thing to exemplify somebody who is growing but is not perfect in any way. So by these four practices, we can create a pure land in an impure land, and not in a forced or manipulative way, but in a natural way. And it really is a joint enterprise that we all do together. In the beginning, I said it's like a Buddha will create a pure land. But it's not really that this great Bodhisattva or Buddha can come along and click their fingers and make everything okay for us. We have to do it for ourselves, actually. So we might have an idea of like wish for a guru who's going to make everything okay for us. But that is not what's going to happen. What we have to have the Buddha at the heart of what we do. In fact, we're part of creating the Buddhas, you know, our historical Buddhas, Pure Land, but we need to make it happen. And there's a little story, which I think is a much more kind of Christian story, but it kind of really resonated with me, about a person who, it's a flood, there's a terrible flood, and there's a person who goes up to their roof, and they're standing on their roof, and they kind of go, God, please save me. I've prayed to you for years. I've been a really good Christian. Could you save me? I'm in big trouble. The water's rising. And then some people come along with a boat and they go, get on the boat, we can save you. But the person goes, no, God's going to save me. And then a helicopter comes and they're going, climb up the ladder to the helicopter. The person's going, no, God's going to save me. Well, sadly, the water rises and they drown. and they go to heaven and they go, God, why didn't you save me? And God goes, I sent a boat, I sent a helicopter, what more do you want? And I think there's something there for us. It's about like we are making something happen in here, which is from the Buddha and is transcendental and is magical, but we have to do it together. And to the extent that we develop ourselves, to the extent that we practice the Dharma, to the extent that we purify our minds, is the extent we'll build the Pure Land. So we can see it mythically as the figure of Avalokiteshvara, who's over here. Bodhinaga talked about the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, last week. And this is a very strong, potent myth for us in Triratna. So this, in a way, the Bodhisattva is all of us together. In a way, the Bodhisattva is the Pure Land, is the Buddha Land, all together. And we can all be one of those 1,000 arms. We give what we can, whatever our particular skills are, what we can do, we give. We do what we can to create those 4 Samgravastus together, we give that. But what's really important is, at his heart, Avalokiteshvara holds what's called the Chintamani. It's a blue jewel, and it's in those hands that are at his heart. And that Chintamani is the wish for liberation for all beings. It's the bodhicitta. And in order for us to be a bodhisattva, part of a bodhisattva, We need to have a glimmer of that in our being. We need that, or it's not a spiritual community that we're part of. We might be part of a really positive community that's doing all sorts of great things, but we need to have that magical wish for enlightenment for ourselves and for all beings at the heart of it. And we also need to be the strongest hand of Avalokiteshvara we can be. So that means we need to practice, and we need to meditate, practice ethics, study, so that we can be as wise as we can, so that we're living more and more in line with reality. Because the Pure Land we create together will be, the more inspired we are, the more we are living in touch with the Dharma, the more it will be a Pure Land. And we create the Pure Land together as a Sangha, as a spiritual community, as a network of friendships. And actually creating Sangha is a practice, just like Dharma study, just like ritual, just like meditation, that leads us to grow. And we're not just creating a spiritual community for ourselves and for the rest of the Sangha. Sangharakshita thought that centres, that spiritual communities could become the nucleus for a new society. So he wrote, "We need to have an aspiration that a centre should serve a more noble, radical, even revolutionary function than simply giving people their spiritual vitamins to help them stagger along on the path of worldliness for another few days. Any centre associated with the movement I founded is intended to be nothing less than the nucleus of a new society. It is designed to allow people to develop as human beings. It will not try and do for people what they can only do for themselves, but it provides facilities, opportunities, an environment of encouragement, as well as a social and spiritual context of human fellowship, which makes it easier for people to develop as human beings." And he thought that if we could do that here together in a small way, well, that will go out into society. And it does already, because, lots of people here have jobs and families, and us growing affects them, and it ripples out into the world. I'm also very inspired by the way that Sangharakshita writes about the ideal Buddha land, that it's made up of individuals living in free association with one another, inspired by the principles of great compassion and transcendental wisdom, and above all, by the bodhicitta, the will to enlightenment for all beings. So that's talking about us as individuals living in free association, that we want to be together, we want to practice together, we're doing it because we want to. We're not doing it just to be part of the group. I mean, of course, groups are really important to us, and being part of a supportive group is really important. But there's a sense that we try and work together as much as possible as people who are, not coming from, real need to be part of a positive group, but are actually strong practitioners who can work together. So this perhaps sounds a bit, remote and far off, but I really do experience a sense of it, sometimes on retreat and here in Sheffield. I'm really proud of the lineage of the Sheffield Buddhist Centre, and I think there's something very special here, an atmosphere, and we're all part of creating it. So from the very first week of an introductory course, whatever we do, whether we can enjoy working together or be in study groups, so maybe at Sangha Works Days, at the garden party, etc., all of us can take part of taking responsibility for creating this Buddha land. What we have here, I think, is very important. It's very beautiful. And at the core, it's not just the building, it's not just the beautiful gardens, how lovely they are. It is our connections with one another that create the Sangha. So it is our shared aspiration. It is our communication with one another. And what we can do is we can connect to the potential, to the highest in all of us. We can think of ourselves as all training to be Buddhas, and we can support each other in that. So we've seen that the Sangha can be the nucleus of a new society. It can provide an alternative, radical vision of how people can relate to each other, because it's the vision of a bodhisattva. And we have seen that the vision of building a Buddha land together in a community with friends, with a shared vision of the highest human potential, Well, what could be a better way to live, I think. So that is why I see that jointly creating a Buddha land with others who share the same values of me is the most important thing that I can be doing with my precious human life. Okay.